Welcome to Voice of Africa, where we bring you Africa's unfolding history through an African lens. Today's story takes us to Niger Republic, where a moment unlike anything in the country's modern era has just taken place. On Thursday, November 20th, 2025, the capital city of Niamey became a river of voices and energy as thousands lined up from the airport straight to the presidential palace. The crowds were not forced. No one was rounded up. People came willingly, chanting, waving flags, wearing the image of their leader on shirts, and celebrating a man who, in just 2 years, has pulled his nation into a new chapter that many thought was impossible.
General Abdourahmane Tchiani had just returned from a historic 2-week journey across every corner of Niger. This wasn't a symbolic national tour. It was a show of presence, accountability, and a deliberate message that no region, no village, no community is too far for a leader to reach. He touched all 8 regions, from the far northern uranium belt around Arlit down to the tense borders of Tillabéri and Diffa, and from military installations in Zinder to the remote communities that had almost forgotten what government presence feels like. For once, the forgotten were no longer forgotten. But what made this return different is that it came at a time when Niger is suddenly becoming the economic surprise of the continent. The World Bank, which has no reason to flatter any government, now projects that Niger's economy will grow by at least 14.4% in 2025, the highest in Africa. A country once dismissed as one of the poorest on earth has become the fastest growing economy on the continent. And this is happening barely 2 years after Niger expelled French troops, nationalized its uranium wealth, reshaped regional politics, and joined hands with Mali and Burkina Faso in a new movement of independence, resource sovereignty, and self-determination. But before we understand how Niger reached this moment, we must look back at the turning point that changed everything. On July 26, 2023, the country witnessed a dramatic shift when then Presidential Guard Commander Abdourahmane Tchiani detained President Mohamed Bazoum and announced a change of leadership. Western governments labeled Niger the last democratic hope of the Sahel. But beneath that label was a harsh truth. Insecurity was spreading, foreign troops had been stationed in the country for 70 years with no meaningful results, unemployment was rising, and the country's uranium, worth billions in the global nuclear market, was enriching companies in Paris, while ordinary Nigerians lived without stable electricity. Imagine that contradiction. A town like Arlit powers nearly a quarter of France's nuclear electricity, but its own people live in darkness. This contradiction became the rallying point for Tchiani's takeover. Within days, crowds filled the streets of Niamey, waving Nigerian flags, rejecting foreign domination, and demanding full control of their resources and their future. But promises are easy. Results are harder. That is why this nationwide tour was important. It was not a show. It was an audit of progress, done in the open, in front of the people most affected by past failures. And what the government showcased over these 2 weeks surprised even those who doubted the coup from day one. Despite sanctions from ECOWAS in 2023, sanctions that were meant to crush the new leadership, the economy refused to collapse. Instead, Niger began to rise. In 2024, the economy grew by 8.9%, already a record for the country. But in 2025, it nearly doubled that figure. The secret behind this transformation lies in 3 pillars: reclaiming natural resources at full market value, the rapid expansion of oil production, which quadrupled within 2 years, and major agricultural reforms that stabilized food security and boosted rural income across the country. For the first time, Niger's minerals are being sold at global market rates instead of colonial-era discounts. Oil exports reached nearly 28 million barrels in 2025 alone, and with better weather patterns and government support, crops that once failed began to flourish again. These changes combined to produce the 14.4% growth rate that is now shocking the world. However, growth on paper is one thing. The real question is whether ordinary people will feel it. That question will define Tchiani's leadership. Economists admit the numbers are real, but the everyday realities will take time to shift. Communities in Niger still face insecurity, infrastructure gaps, and the effects of decades of underinvestment. The country has not solved its challenges. It has only begun the journey. Security is where the struggle remains most intense. Tchiani inherited a military that had been stretched thin, with jihadist groups operating in multiple regions. ISIS, Sahel in the west, JNIM cells across central zones, and Boko Haram along the Lake Chad basin. This is a complex battleground. Foreign military forces failed to contain these threats for decades. Niger, under Tchiani, is attempting a new approach rooted in African-led solutions. Defense spending has increased, regional coordination with Mali and Burkina Faso has strengthened, and the Alliance of Sahel States has begun building a joint regional force of 5,000 soldiers. During the tour, Tchiani stood on front lines in Zinder and Tillabéri, speaking directly to soldiers who often felt abandoned under previous governments. For the first time in years, they saw a commander-in-chief physically present in the danger zones, engaging them face-to-face instead of speaking from a distant, fortified capital. Yet the reality remains that parts of Niger are still unsafe. Attacks continue. Villages remain vulnerable. The government argues that they are building long-term security capacity instead of chasing short-term victories. Whether this strategy succeeds will shape the next decade of Niger's history. The most emotional moment of the tour happened in Arlit. Standing in front of massive stockpiles of uranium once controlled by French company Uranium, Tchiani delivered a message many Nigerians felt in their bones. He said that from this moment onward, Niger's uranium belongs to Niger, not to France, not to multinational corporations, to the people whose land has carried the weight of extraction without reward. This message resonated deeply across the Sahel because it speaks to a century-old African struggle, the fight for dignity and ownership. Niger is now negotiating deals with Russia and China, including a historic Russian proposal to buy 1,000 metric tons of uranium for $170 million. For the first time in 50 years, France is no longer the sole buyer. Russia is also discussing nuclear cooperation that includes building power plants to finally bring electricity to northern communities that have suffered the cruel irony of producing power for Europe while living in darkness themselves. China is offering infrastructure partnerships and mining investments. This diversification marks a sharp break from the era of dependency. Across Africa, similar movements are emerging. Congo is renegotiating cobalt contracts. Botswana has reclaimed diamond revenue. Burkina Faso and Mali have expelled foreign troops and reclaimed mines. Together, these countries are rewriting the relationship between African nations and former colonial powers. Niger is becoming the spearhead of this new wave of resource nationalism, an African movement rooted in sovereignty, fairness, and self-respect. This tour, therefore, was not simply a celebration. It was a public demonstration that Niger's government is active, present, and pushing forward with its vision. People saw their leader in the mines, in the farms, in military bases, and in the villages where presidents rarely show up. The crowds in Niamey, thousands and thousands strong, showed that people believe in this new direction, not because everything is perfect, but because they finally see leadership that walks among them. The real test is what comes next. Can economic growth translate into secure roads, functioning schools, quality hospitals, electricity in rural areas, and real jobs for young people? Can Niger turn this moment of sovereignty into long-term prosperity? And will the model of the Alliance of Sahel States spread across Africa or remain an experiment in the Sahel? One thing is clear: Africa is watching, the world is watching, and Niger's new path, rooted in sovereignty, nationalism, and an unapologetic defense of African wealth, may reshape how the entire continent negotiates its place in global politics. If you followed this far, thank you for standing with Voice of Africa, where we tell Africa's stories with dignity and truth. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Niger's transformation will last? Will other African nations follow this path? Your voice matters.
Across Africa, similar movements are emerging. Congo is renegotiating cobalt contracts. Botswana has reclaimed diamond revenue. Burkina Faso and Mali have expelled foreign troops and reclaimed mines. Together, these countries are rewriting the relationship between African nations and former colonial powers. Niger is becoming the spearhead of this new wave of resource nationalism, an African movement rooted in sovereignty, fairness, and self-respect. This tour, therefore, was not simply a celebration. It was a public demonstration that Niger's government is active, present, and pushing forward with its vision. People saw their leader in the mines, in the farms, in military bases, and in the villages where presidents rarely show up. The crowds in Niamey, thousands and thousands strong, showed that people believe in this new direction. Not because everything is perfect, but because they finally see leadership that walks among them.